Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother Asarimhotep with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And today we are going to discuss in depth in two parts. This is part one, and then what's going to follow is part two of a discussion titled Ki.duru Km.t for the people in the back. And so, as you know, probably every 4 to 6 months, somebody wants to bring up the meaning of the word Kemet debate up. And this has been happening for like the past 20 years or whatnot. So we got to keep emphasizing these particular points that we've made over the years. And so there's some more individuals out there who hasn't gotten the memo and doesn't know what the nature of the argument is, who are putting videos on in the cyberspace. And so, this is just another conversation correcting the mythology sent by these emotionals, as I call them. So it's going to be a good discussion. So make sure that you have your pen and paper and make sure that you like the video. All that and more will return in just a bit. And we are back. So, as I stated earlier, the title of our conversation is Ki.duru Km.t for the people in the back. And for those that don't know, the word Ki.duru is an ancient Sumerian word that has a variety of meanings, but in Ki.duru form, it generally means a wetland, a wet place, or irrigated land, or irrigated field, right? And so, as a result of a number of linguistic tests, I have come to the conclusion that Ki.duru is the Sumerian cognate for the word Kemet. And this was discussed, in a text. And so, as I mentioned in the intro, there are a number of people who, of course, haven't read the text and don't know the nature of the argument. So they go online to spread a number of false allegations and misinformation concerning the nature of the debate and the like. And so we just want to kind of use this time to dispel this myth, because we've dealt with Ki.duru in bits and pieces online. So this one is just going to be dedicated to this particular term, right? So as I stated in the last video, addressing Conjuverse and Chuck Morgan and others like them, I have a simple request, and I've been making this request for over 10 years now. If you believe that my arguments, for example, that Sumerian is not an isolate, but is related to African languages like Bantu, Yoruba, ancient Egyptian, etc., or if you believe that my methods are pseudo regarding Sumerian, and you are itching to prove to the world that I am wrong, I'm meaning Brother Asarimhotep, and then I would encourage you to contact a Sumerologist who also has a background in historical comparative linguistics and ask them to have a public conversation with me regarding the issues. Because what a lot of these folks like to do is to make claims against my arguments, but they have no background in the subject matter. And, if you reply to them, then they'll just keep replying, making, social media posts and video posts. And it gets kind of annoying, especially when you have to explain the basics to someone. Um, and their comprehension isn't at the level that you need in order to have a meaningful conversation. So we can cut all of that out by just having the one-on-one discussion with the sumerologist, right? And one who has knowledge and has done historical comparative linguistic work, because it's not enough that somebody has uh, a background in philology. They need to have a linguistics background, because that's a totally different field, and it requires a certain knowledge that general sumerologists just do not have. So the request is that you find a sumerologist and one who has a background in linguistics, and we can set up the public conversation, and we'll have the dialogue about the issues at hand here. And then that way, you can't accuse me of getting the wrong person if I pick somebody, right? So you have the opportunity to reach out to your favorite scholar and see would they be willing to have this conversation. So that way, if the conversation doesn't go your way, it's not because I picked, somebody that you wouldn't approve of, right? If that makes sense. So that is the request, and we will continue with the conversation, right? So, just a little review of the fundamental issue here, right? And we've discussed this 100 times, so we're not going to go through all the details. This is just a summary review. So, for those who don't know, I have challenged the Egyptological uh, meaning of the word Kemet, which they define as the black land, referring to the soil, the color of the soil that was left in terms of the deposits from the flooding of the Nile River, the black soil deposits as that was left once the flood waters have seceded, right? Then there's another school of thought who argues that the word Kemet doesn't refer to black land, but in fact refers to the color of the people. It's a racial designation. And so I have made an argument that both are essentially wrong, and that the word itself just refers to a type of land, a type of fertile land that has no color connotation, and that the root of Kemet is Kim, and it is a fossilized term that has a homograph with a word Kim, that's an adjective meaning black, or to be black, or to become blackened or darkened, right? And it's because of this homograph, we don't know if it was a homonym, but definitely a homograph, that is causing the confusion. And so those who are not trained or have a background in historical comparative linguistics, they wouldn't know in their research, to produce experiments that would separate the homonyms and homographs in their research. And this is why we had the confusion. So if you don't know what the word Kemet, how it is graphically represented, this is the most common form that you're going to find in the ancient Egyptian texts, with the Kim biliteral, the M al phonetic complement with the T suffix, and with the so-called newt symbol, which is interpreted to mean town, but as we have discussed and proven in my 2023 work, that it is in fact a representation of uh, two irrigated, two perpendicular irrigation channels crossing in a field, in like in terms of a irrigation basin, right? But that's neither there. You can read the text, and the text in which I speak of course, is Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards a Meaning for the Place Name Kemet, which you can get online on my website at osirimhotep.com, osirimhotep.com, as well as amazon.com and other online outlets, right? And so here is a representation of an irrigated field and what it looks like. And so now we're going to take this time to define the word Kemet, right? And so, as I've stated in previous conversations, I define the word Kemet as a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. It's a type of arable land, land that is buildable, um, suitable for living, and where different animals come and congregate to graze, right? And there are many cognates across African languages, but for this slide, I chose Sumerian Ki.duru, meaning damp ground, irrigable land, or Chiluba, Chiankanda, a piece of land, field, part of land being plowed in a day. In other words, farmland, right? And so I have concluded that the word Kim, excuse me, the place name, the toponym Kemet, derives not from Kim meaning black, but Kim meaning complete and full. And it comes as the noun version, but it comes from the verb meaning to rise and to feel. It's a rare form in the Kim form, but there was a series of sound changes in Egyptian, and so you'll find it in other forms represented. But this word Kim meaning to rise and to feel when it's speaking of the Nile River. And so when we talk about Kim complete or full, we're talking about the overflow, right? And so then Kemet we can define as a riparian land. And we use this term riparian land because of it's not just any kind of land, right? It has a particular type of feature that we are looking for. And I give a semantic evolution, and it is all explained in the text. And we'll have some of this conversation here that a root meaning foot, leg, diverted into two semantic paths, but ended up meaning essentially the same thing, or both belonging to the same semantic field. One directly meaning foot, leg, meaning ground, earth, field, etc. And then another one going to propagate, run, and then regarding water in terms of running water, which becomes a word for river, and also to spread and disperse, meaning, and then it derives from there to rise, to swell, and to fill, to complete, to flood, to inundate, and then when it's a nominal form, again, it becomes a word for river, water, wetland, waterwood, watered field, etc., etc. But that is all explained in the text. And so I highly recommend that y'all get it. And, here's some other uh, cognates of the term Kemet in Western Central Africa and Cameroon with these particular Bantu languages. Gam meaning farm in these languages, and Kumadin, Adin meaning kind of a land. It's just kind of a suffix for land. So this is the word Kemet in Runda language. So the Adin is equivalent to the T suffix in ancient Egypt, and we may have a discussion about this, which will also some scholars have talked about the word Kemet actually being pronounced in the Old and Middle Kingdom Kumat, and the Runda language may lend credence to that particular argument. And we have a video on that discussion as well on this channel. And so this is a graphic representation of a riparian zone, and the source um, defines a riparian zone or a riparian area as the interface between land and a river or a stream. Riparian is also the proper nomenclature for one of the 15 terrestrial biomes of the Earth. Plant habitats of communities along the river margins and banks are called riparian vegetation, characterized by hydrophilic plants. Now, a riparian land refers to terrain that is adjacent to rivers and streams and is subject to periodic or occasional flooding. It is this periodic or occasional flooding that is the key characteristic of what makes a riparian zone, right? So it's not simply that there's a river um, running through the territory, right? But if there's a time cycle of floods, like that's one of the characteristics, that it floods all the time, then that's a riparian land, right? So to kind of help the people in the back, you know, and to understand the concept of riparian uh, land or zones or whatnot, I sought the help of some AI agents, because some of y'all believe AI is God, right? So we're going to ask God what is a riparian land and what characteristics define it, right? So I'm asking Claude, right? This is the AI Claude, and Claude responds. Riparian land refers to an area of land adjacent to rivers, streams, lakes, wetlands, and other water bodies. The term comes from the Latin word riparius, meaning of or belonging to the bank of a river. Riparian areas are characterized by several distinct features. Um, the first feature is the physical characteristics. The land is directly influenced by the presence of water, creating unique soil conditions that are typically more moist and fertile than surrounding areas. These zones often have distinct topography, including flood plains, terraces, and slopes leading down to the water body. Vegetation. Riparian areas support specialized plant communities adapted to periodic flooding and high soil moisture, right? So you keep seeing this word flood come up back and forth, right? And then we'll just read this top one, hydrology. These areas experience regular interaction with both surface water and groundwater. They may flood periodically and typically have shallow water tables. The soil remains saturated or near saturated for extended periods, either due to the underground water source or because of the occasional flooding, right? And so anybody who knows anything about ancient Egypt is that is what defines Egypt. This is how Egypt was able to sustain itself. And that's why, it is said that Egypt is the gift of the Nile, because how important the flooding of the Nile was in ancient times to ancient Egypt. So much so that if it did not flood, or there was a certain amount of flood waters that did not happen, it was short on the flood, it was equivalent to a drought, and very many political situations arose as a result of the Nile River not overflowing its banks. So this is what defines a riparian land. And so now we're going to go into Sumer with this in regards to our word Ki.duru. So it's not just any land, right? It's not just any irrigated field or wetlands. It has a particular characteristic. So as discussed by M. Erica Calto Ferreira, if I'm saying that correctly. And if you're watching, I do apologize if I did not say your name correctly. But in her article, titled "Let Me Be Your Canal: Some Thoughts on Agricultural Landscape and Female Bodies in Sumero-Akkadian Sources." Ki.duru specifically refers to a plot of land that has been conveniently inundated before plowing can take place. Right? That's a key word here. It's a plot of land. So we're dealing with a type of land that has been inundated. Right? She continues, what's more, the fact that Ki.duru is presented as a setting propitious or conducive for the grazing of animals. So it's a type of fertile land. Seems to address an implicit metaphoric relation, namely the linking of eating and food consumption with the performance of the sexual act. Right. So it has a metaphoric uh, connotation and dealing with a sexual act or referring to the genital area of a female, which you can find in the various dictionaries. But its primary meaning is the uh, the land that has been inundated. And so, for anyone who is not a virgin on this app, you know that when a woman is aroused and it's time to have intercourse, you know that a woman releases water in her vaginal area to uh, to help with the act to go smoothly and enjoyably. Uh, Trying to keep it PG, on this live, right? So you can understand where the metaphor comes from. It's because of the flooding, the releasing of the water. This is how the word gets its uh, meaning, right? And so many of you may not know what the word inundate means. So I went to dictionary.com and typed in the word inundate for you. And what's this going to say? It's a verb used with an object, inundated, inundating, meaning to flood, cover or overspread with water, deluge, to overwhelm in the secondary meaning, right? So when um, Dr. Uh, Kautu Ferreira says Ki.duru is a plot of land that has been conveniently inundated before plowing. She's saying conveniently flooded, overwhelmed with water, right? And so, with this definition of inundate, the question then arises, well, is the water coming as a result of rain, or is it coming as a result of the overflow of water in the river? And so, to answer that question, I went into the AI again to ask it the question, did it rain a lot in Sumeria? Right? So this time I asked Gemini, and Gemini said no. Ancient Sumeria did not experience abundant rainfall. The climate in Sumeria, located in southern Mesopotamia, was characterized as semi arid or desert like with low rainfall and hot temperatures during the summer months. Average annual rainfall was significantly low, estimated to be around 100 to 250 millimeters per year. This low rainfall, combined with high evaporation rates, made the region largely unsuitable for agriculture that relied solely on precipitation. And this is the key here. So it's letting you know that no, it did not rain there. So because of the low rainfall, the flooding could not have happened as a result of direct rainfall in Sumer, right? And as it continues to go on, talk about the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And in the red, I have highlighted the rivers provided a vital source of water for irrigation, allowing Sumerians to cultivate crops like barley and wheat despite the dry climate. So, how did the river water um, help in the irrigation? They created irrigation channels um, leading up to the river and waited for the river to flood periodically, and then this is how they would irrigate their fields. So there's not a lane of rainfall. So that's just one source. So we go to another source here. This is history.org. So this isn't AI. This is actual historians, and they're giving a summary of ancient Sumeria. So in section uh, 4.A, Life in Sumer. There's a section of it on the website that says the physical environment there has remained relatively the same since about 8000 BCE. The landscape is flat and marshy. The ground is primarily made up of sand and silt with no rock. The climate is very dry with only about 16.9 centimeters of rain falling per year. Natural vegetation is sparse and no trees other than palm trees grow there. The rivers overflow their banks in the spring, sometimes violently and destructively. During this process, they deposit a rich layer of silt on the surrounding floodplain. Again, this is exactly like what goes on in ancient or you have to say ancient Egypt because in the modern era, the Egyptian government has built several dams, and the dams prevent the historical periodic flooding that made ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet so famous. So, but as far as ancient Kemet was concerned, the Nile River behaved the exact same as the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in ancient Sumeria. So they had the same characteristics. They flood and they deposit rich alluvial soil, and that's how they get their fertile fields, right? So again, this is why we have to emphasize, and for anybody who wants the source of this wording here for riparian land, it's naturespots.net. But riparian land refers to terrain that is adjacent to rivers and streams and is subject to periodic or occasional flooding, right? So um, we continue. And so, again, this is just a map. Ancient Egypt and Sumeria both have rivers that overflow its banks and deposit rich alluvial soil. So it's interesting that, none of these lands are labeled the black land because of the rich black soil deposit. I do apologize. It seemed that we had a little difficulty with the mic. So I just want to emphasize, just in case, um, y'all didn't catch the first part, but we're going to be dealing with the semantic field now. And it is important because semantics is a huge part of historical comparative linguistics. So you have to be familiar with what falls into a semantic field, right? And so this text here, Historical Semantics, Historical Word Formation, edited by Jacek Fisiak. And there's a chapter in the text titled The Influence of Semantic Fields on Semantic Change by Adrian Lerre, if I'm saying that correctly, right? And so um, he states in this paper, I shall show that some insights into the principles of semantic change can be found by looking not at the whole lexicon, but at words which belong to a single semantic field. A semantic field is a set of lexemes which cover a certain conceptual domain and which bear certain specifiable relations to one another. An example of a simple semantic field would be the conceptual domain of cooking, which in English is divided up into lexemes boil, bake, fry, roast, etc. And so, like if I'm doing some comparative work between two related languages, in language A, and under the cooking domain, they may have the word to bake, but another one may have the word to roast. And while in English these would be two different terms, they belong in the same semantic field of cooking. And so, if everything else works out in terms of the regular sound meaning correspondences, you would include these two as part of the same process, because technology today has us uh, thinking differently about how we do it. So when we think of baking, we think about what goes in the oven, right? Whereas you may roast something in an oven or on a barbecue grill or on top of a stove, right? But back in the day when these words were formatting, none of this stuff exists. Everything was roasted, however you want to do it, baked, fried, on an open flame, out in the open, right? And, or you cooked in the same area, even if you had a brick, like a covered brick area. So, so this is why they all belong to the same semantic domain. So I'll continue. A basic premise of semantic field theory is that to understand lexical meaning, it is necessary to look at sets of semantically related words, not simply at each word in isolation. By semantically related, I refer to relationships between lexical items such as synonymy, such as in big and large. So if I'm looking at two dictionaries and one has the entry, some word, and then its meaning is big, and then I'm looking in another entry in another dictionary, they have the same word, but it's defined as large. Big and large are synonymous; they're the same, right? So you would count that even though the two dictionaries define them using different words, but they mean the same thing. So you got to be familiar with synonyms when you're doing lexical comparisons, right? And so there's antonymy, as in big and small. So I wouldn't count a word that means big in one sense and then small, another word that may look similar but has a meaning small. These are antonyms. So a cognate must stand on two legs, form and meaning, right? And then hyponymy, as in rose and in flower. Rose and flower in plants are in the same domain, right? Or you can include fruit into that. And then we have converseness, as in buy or sell. And then there are words that are incompatible, such as cat, dog, cow, horse, pig, etc., because these are distinct animals. However, you could equate all of them if there's a word meaning a general category of animal, right? Like or like even in a scientific sense, like mammal, right? Like, a cat and a dog and a cow and a horse and a pig are all distinct animals. So you wouldn't equate them, but they're all in the animal category and they're all mammals, right? That means they don't hatch from eggs. So keep that in mind. So here's an example of what I mean. So like we have Ki.duru in the Annotated Sumerian Dictionary by Mark Cohen, and his secondary meaning here, meaning wet, soggy ground. But then he gives some textual examples, but he defines it as, so like you have this sentence here written in Sumerian or transliterated Sumerian, and then we have, if a man give another man a field, a Ki.duru. So this field is in the same semantic field, no pun intended, as wet, soggy ground, like damp ground and irrigated land that is defined by the Electric Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary. And then he gives another example, ala Ki.duru bienu or bienu akab or kileir arabtuku. Keep guard against the field having watery spots, and it will be okay for you. So, you can substitute the word field when you're saying the word Ki.duru, right? These are examples of what we mean by semantic field. And so, as I stated, the EPSD defines Ki.duru as damp ground, irrigable land, but they also define it as field, like in this phrase, mash Ki.duru, meaning a payment for irrigation work done on rented field. So the field part, the rented field, is the Ki.duru, right? So we have Foxvox Elementary Dictionary. So he has Ki.duru as damp ground, wet place, describing fields. So this is why it's important to have a wide range of dictionaries and grammar books when you're studying languages, so that you can get a more holistic sense of terminology, syntax, grammar, and the like. And so we'll see later on in part 2 of our discussion how this word dur, meaning to sit, becomes in a different dialect form, tush, meaning residence, ki-tush, meaning residence, and how the semantic field of to sit can then be used as the word for ground, below, field, earth, land, etc., right? And so we had this word ki-tush, meaning seat, residence, dwelling place, habitation, right? And this is the fuller form of when you get the word and like, we'll show that in part 2. And so I'm going to end this segment now so that you can digest what was just said in one setting, and then if need be you can come back to part 2 and go through that once you've had an understanding of what was said in this context. So with that said, I will see you all in a few moments for part 2. Peace.
Tokyo wanna those that. What's up? Feeling like I dropped the draw for and call Uno. Came to kick the door with the game man judo. Pin game low, that's why they give me kudos. Inspired by the 3-0. 595, check it for pack light. Hit the turnpike, slide to a baseline. Gotta sound like I just hit the 85. Oh, I'm so ready, by enemies necessary. We gon' be legendary, hold up. About to grow the payrolls. If you see the vision and you're with it, you should say so. Cause we bout building, elevating the mill.